Hello everyone, and welcome to this special Mental Health Matters session. As part of this year's Mental Health Awareness Week, Clear Channel are delighted to have partnered with the fantastic team at Isolated Talks in order to bring you this unique event, which aims to shine a light on the importance of mental health in the workplace. On the call today, we've got attendees from across Clear Channel, as well as members of the Balance Out of Home network. So welcome to each and every one of you. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Mark Smith. I'm the UK Sales Director for Clear Channel, and I'm delighted to introduce you today to some of the speakers. We have a team of world-class experts and creative minds joining us from both the UK and the US, and they're all here to share some practical tips, some fresh ideas, and some inspiring ways to help us all look after our mental well-being. Now, we're going to kick things off shortly with a talk from Alice Firbank, who is going to focus on the theme of learning to listen. And if you don't know Alice, her career has been driven by a desire to help people. She's spent time as a support worker for the YMCA, working in community engagement for Suffolk County Council, and as a business and marketing coordinator for the Suffolk Young People's Health Project. But for the last 2.5 years, Alice has worked as a corporate account manager for Samaritans UK. So we're delighted to have Alice with us. Following on from Alice, we'll be handing over to Giles Edwards, who's Managing Director of Gasp agency. He's the host of the Call to Action podcast and the creator of Isolated Talks, who've helped pull together today's session. And he will be chairing a very special panel discussion for us. So I'm going to let him introduce himself a little bit later on. But the aim of the panel will be to answer one particular question, which is how do we overcome the stigma of mental health and make it okay to talk? So as I say, I'll leave Giles to introduce himself, but just to introduce his panelists, we have Laurel and Victoria Rosselli, who are founders of Our Silent Partner, which is an online community which aims to turn struggles with mental health into a public portfolio of creative work. Now, Laurel is a freelance writer and creative director, and she's based in San Francisco, so it's very early morning there. Thanks for joining us, Laurel. And she's also a creative director for EA Games. Victoria is also a freelance art director and designer, and she's currently based in Chicago. They'll be joined also by Dave Birss, who is a trainer, speaker, and consultant to businesses in the areas of creativity and innovation. And last but by no means least, we also have Scott Morrison, who will be talking to us on the theme of knowing your value. He's the founder of Boom UK, and he works with global brands and C-suite leaders to unblock, unlock, and unleash commercial and creative or cultural impact that transforms businesses and individuals. He's worked with or on the boards of some of the world's most recognized brands, including Saatchi & Saatchi, Wieden & Kennedy, Nike, Levi's, Xbox, Activision, and Diesel. So what a lineup we have for you today. So thanks everyone for joining us. Now, we are hoping to make this very much an interactive session. So at the end, we'll be reserving some time for questions, the last 10-15 minutes or so. So please do stay for that if you can. If you've got any questions throughout, there's a Q&A box. So please do drop those questions in. Obviously, you can point them towards a specific speaker if you'd like to, but if you'd just rather ask the question generally, we will try and direct it to the most relevant person to answer that at the end of the session. So do get thinking about questions you'd like to ask our speakers today as we go through. So that's it from me. Thanks one and all for joining us, and thanks once again for all of our speakers. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Alice from the Samaritans UK for her talk. Alice.
Thank you very much, Mark. Hopefully you can all see and hear me.
Yep.
Yeah, I've got a thumbs up, and see the slides now as well. So yeah, absolutely delighted to be here and talk to you about Samaritans. Hopefully a few of you know of the charity already, but I'm going to talk a bit more about it, give you a bit of an overview of what we've been doing over the last year, give you a few tips for supporting yourself and those around you, and go into a bit more detail about Samaritans listening tips, which is the thing that I think we do really well. So hopefully you'll take something from today. And I do have to jump off, but if you do have any questions or any feedback, please do get in touch with me, and I'd be really pleased to hear from you. So this is Samaritans at a glance. We have branches across the UK and Ireland, 201 of them. Each of them looks slightly different from each other. You know, some people will just be a few people in a room. Others, like our Central London branch of Samaritans, really is a hub in the community and normally would be open for face-to-face support. Most people know us, though, for our 24/7 helpline. So the helpline is completely free, it's completely confidential. Anyone can call us. And what happens when they call is they'll get put through to a volunteer who will listen to them. And they'll listen about whatever it is that person wants to talk about. It could be that they're going through a bereavement. It could be that they're struggling with debt or an addiction. It could just be something that they want to, get off their chest and don't have anyone else to talk about. Maybe something that they find embarrassing, or just need another perspective on things. We're not just there for the moment of crisis. Like I say, we're there for everyone. People also get in touch with us via email. They write letters to us. And about 6 months ago, we launched a pilot of our online chat service, which is proving incredibly popular. Just another way for people to communicate and get that support from one of our listening volunteers. So the service is run entirely by volunteers. We've got about 20,000 of them, which I just think is amazing. And between them, they respond to around 10,000 calls for help every single day. And, like I say, some of those calls will be from someone who's going through maybe something like a loss, and they may call us a few times for that regular support. From some people, we'll only hear from them once, and it's just that 10 minutes that they just need to really get something off their chest. It doesn't matter. And what we do know from some research that we did last year is that people who do use that helpline report a significant reduction in distress, which we thought was the case, but now we're really reassured to know that is working. Normally, we like to reach out to people in the community as well. See, that's been a bit more tricky in the last year, but we like to be where people may need us. So festivals, events, maybe in the aftermath of crisis, like a terrorist attack, our volunteers will try and be there on the ground. Train stations as well. We have a number of strategic partnerships with people like Network Rail and Highways England to make sure that whenever someone might need someone to listen, that there's someone there. And this is why it's so important. I won't, spend too long on this slide or dwell on the statistics, but unfortunately, the truth is that suicide is the biggest killer of men under the age of 50, and now it's the biggest killer of young people aged 16 to 24. We know that suicide is not equal as well. The lower your social class, the more likely you are to be affected by suicide, and also men are more likely to be affected by suicide. So that's work that we're doing to prevent that. We do believe that suicide is not inevitable, it's preventable. So a lot of our research and policy will focus on that. Like I say, I won't spend too long on this because behind each of those figures and statistics, there's a person, there's a family, and there's a story, and a whole range of complex issues that have led to that individual, taking their own life. So that's why we do what we do, and do sessions like this and try and raise awareness and give everyone just a few different skills to be able to support someone or themselves when they're not feeling 100%. So on the theme of supporting ourselves, as you may or may not be aware, this week is Mental Health Awareness Week for us. And it's all about connecting with nature this year. So that's a theme that the Mental Health Foundation have chosen. I think myself and others have, really taken advantage of getting outdoors in the last year. I know that for some time, we were only able to get that hour of exercise each day, and we really did try and make the most of it. And what research has found is that it's actually that connection with nature that makes the difference. So what I'm encouraging people to do this week is to really level up, if you like, what you're already doing. So you might have a dog that you walk, you might enjoy a walk after work, you might be into your running, but how can you take that to the next level? It could be that you really try and engage your senses when you do that. So maybe you have a route that you particularly enjoy walking. Maybe you could notice the feeling of the weather on your skin, really feel that sunshine hitting you, or what does the rain feel like, or what can you smell? Can you notice the seasons changing? What does you're under your foot, what does that feel like? Really try and, I know it's a bit of a buzzword, but be grounded and present in that moment, rather than just sort of a stomp around the block. Take it that little bit step further. Make time for yourself, relax and do the things you enjoy. Again, it's not always been easy in the last year. Lots of people have taken on more responsibilities at home and at work. But even if it's just 5 or 10 minutes each day, could be just making sure that you read a couple of chapters of your book, running yourself a nice hot bath, or connecting with nature in some way, tending to your plants at home, even if you don't have a garden, just something that you find relaxing. Eat healthily, get plenty of sleep and exercise. This isn't kind of rocket science, it is taking it back to basics a bit, but hopefully these reminders are helpful. Stay connected and spend time with people you love. The link there actually takes you through to isolated talks, which is obviously a great way of staying connected, particularly in the last year. I think we've all learned, new ways of being connected with others. It takes a little bit more effort sometimes, but it is worth doing. Talk about your problems with people that you trust. So that could be the people around you, friends and family, colleagues, or it could be an organisation like Samaritans. Like I say, we are there for everyone. Pay attention to what you're feeling. Don't just brush these feelings aside. I was actually in a session earlier and we were talking about, connecting with nature. And I noticed that a lot of my connection with nature, or, my physical exercise, I'm distracting myself from it. I might be walking, but I'm listening to a podcast, or I might be running, but I'm kind of putting together a to-do list for what I've got to do at work tomorrow. Really try and pay attention to what you're feeling in that moment, and don't brush those feelings off or try and distract yourself from them. For some people, that might just be having a good old cry. It is for me sometimes. And then the last two things I popped on the slide there are links that will take you through to Samaritan's YouTube channel. And these are relaxation techniques that can be particularly helpful for feelings of anxiety. We know again that in the last year, levels of anxiety have generally risen amongst people. I think it's that level of uncertainty, feeling out of control with what was going on around us. But both of these exercises don't require any kit or equipment. You can do them pretty much anywhere as long as you feel comfortable. And no one actually would need to know that what you were doing. You can do it quite discreetly if that's something that you're conscious of. So just to talk you through very, very quickly, muscle relaxation is where you tense a pair of muscles in your body and hold them for a few seconds and release. And just imagine that tension leaving your body. Controlled breathing, similarly, just holding your breath for a few seconds. Try and interrupt those racing or intrusive thoughts. Focus on your breathing and then release. And those videos will just take you through the timings of that. There are a few apps that will do that as well. But like I say, it can be really helpful, just a simple technique that if you haven't tried already, then please do. So if you're in a good place yourself, you might be wanting to support someone around you. And these are, the skills that our volunteers will use when people do get in touch with us for support. So choose a good time and somewhere without distractions. If you are at work, put your phone away, put your laptop down, maybe book a meeting room, maybe go and get a coffee with someone, or even if you can't do it right there and then, book in that time so that you both know that you're going to have a bit of a deeper conversation, and that they feel that you've really taken that time. Ask them how they are. I often get people say that they worry they're going to say the wrong thing. I assure you, it's very difficult to say the wrong thing, and actually just giving someone that time and space to talk about whatever it is can make all the difference. Just that small gesture. It doesn't have to be a huge gesture or a gift or an hour of your time. Sometimes it's just a little text to say, I'm thinking of you. Listen well. We'll come on to this on the next slide. Avoid giving your view of what's wrong or what they should do. It's not necessarily a well-known fact, but Samaritans, our volunteers, will very rarely give advice. There's a number of reasons for this, but mostly we like people to be able to share how they're experiencing something, rather than jumping in and saying, I felt like that, or I've been through that. We're naturally problem solvers. We want to jump in and fix the whatever it is that's wrong, but sometimes it's better just to let the person tell you what's going on and how that's making them feel. And like I said, small things matter. Just a message on Teams, just a quick WhatsApp message. It doesn't have to be anything too grand or over the top, just a call. to let someone know that they're on your mind and that you want to know how they're doing. So these are Samaritans shush listening tips. Big clue in the name is shush. It's not about you talking, having the answers, jumping in and giving your perspective. It's about taking a step back and really listening. So these, it's active listening is what we call it, and it is a skill, and it's something that doesn't come naturally to everyone. It does take a bit of practice, but it is worth doing when you want to have a bit of a deeper conversation and support someone that might be struggling. So S, show you care. Like I said, give someone your full time and attention. If you are with them face to face, eye contact, really important. Turning the TV off, making sure that you're really with them in that moment. Have patience. Sometimes it's difficult as the person speaking to articulate what you're feeling. Maybe you've never spoken about this before. You might feel a bit ashamed. Some people are worried about crying and getting upset. You can just reassure them that that's okay. Or maybe you've had a couple of conversations and you feel that you're not just getting there. Don't give up. Keep the door open if you like. Use open questions. So these are any questions that start with how, what, why, where, when, and they just require a little bit more explanation on behalf of the other person. You can just flip everyday questions that you would ask. So rather than, did you have a good weekend? You can ask, what did you get up to at the weekend? And it just requires that person to go into a bit more depth. Say it back, check you've understood. There's no harm in saying, can I just clarify? Can I just check? And sometimes it helps to use the same language that person is using with you. And you can just pick out words that they've said and turn that into a question itself. Someone's said, I've been really stressed at work. You could just turn stressed into a question, put a question mark on the end of it, and have courage. It doesn't always come easy. Sometimes you feel a bit awkward. Like I say, you don't want to say the wrong thing or offend anyone, but it is worth doing. We have a hugely successful campaign with Network Rail called Small Talk Saves Lives, and it's so true. These small conversations do really make the world of difference sometimes. So give it a go. I'm conscious that I'm about to run over, so I won't spend too long on this, but if anything that I've said today has inspired you, then please do get in touch and have a look into our volunteering opportunities. There's a couple of reasons there why you might volunteer. We're looking for anyone and everyone to come and join us and to listen to people when they're struggling to cope or in crisis. So do see if it's the right thing for you. And lastly, if you are able to donate, obviously Samaritans is a charity. We rely on those public donations, and anything that you're able to give will support us and help us continue to reach those who are struggling to cope. Really proud that in the last year we've been able to continue to be there 24/7 for people, and I think it's more important than ever. So just to summarise, look after yourself, check in on others, and listen well. There's a cheesy quote on the slide there, which I won't read out, but it does, relate to the idea of connecting with nature. And I'm about to hand over to Giles, and this is actually a fantastic opportunity for me to say a big thank you to Giles. We were supported, or Samaritans were supported, through the Isolated Talks campaign, and we're incredibly grateful. So massive thank you, and thank you for listening to me. Take care.
Alice, thank you. Before I have the pleasure of introducing our panel, I do want to say, Alice, your talk was brilliant. It would be hard to overstate the work that you and Samaritans do every single day and night, not least during the current pandemic with all of the associated challenges. So thank you. We'll make sure your tips are available on the Isolated Talks website too. So who am I? I'm Giles, the founder of Isolated Talks, which was set up over a year ago now to help connect people during the first UK lockdown with all of the isolation, stresses and anxieties that coronavirus brought with it. We continue to creatively support mental health with the help of several people behind the scenes, the help of great partners, including Clear Channel, and crucially over 150 talented speakers who have donated talks and created untold connections, conversations and support. So it gives me huge pleasure to introduce three outstanding people across 2 different time zones from that group. So joining us now is Dave, Laurel and Victoria. you all have so much experience and knowledge, not to mention your own stories, and I want to try and extract as much of that as I can in the next 20 minutes. So to start, and off the back of Alice's learn to listen tips, if we focus on expressing your mental health and opening up, Laurel and Victoria, you both observed quite brilliantly that leaders may have trouble talking about mental health, but they never seem to have trouble talking about creative work. So what you've done so effectively with our silent partner is you've made the work about the mental health conversation. How did that get people talking?
Vic, do you want to take this one or you want me to start?
I was going to say, Laurel, you can go first.
Okay. So our idea was really came out of this kind of weird moment where Vic and I were both feeling our own mental health challenges getting really loud and really looking around like, is somebody going to say something? Like a lot of people in our industry are really struggling right now. And there was that kind of moment where it's like, maybe the people we're waiting for is us. And that's kind of where we came to. And so our silent partner, we had this idea that if we took our internal struggles and made them art, then maybe people who speak the language of art, i.e. creatives, would feel more comfortable having this conversation with each other. And we were really surprised to see who decided to join the conversation. We really had no idea who it was going to be, but we had so much support from just senior leaders across the industry, lots of friends, lots of other creatives just responding to what we were doing and sharing their stories as well. Like, hey, thanks, I needed to see this right now. I'm actually struggling too. And I think that was, we didn't really know what what was gonna come out of what we had done. We just felt compelled to put our stories out there because nobody else was. And we thought, well, if not somebody else, why not us? And that's kind of the approach that we took. And I think sometimes the genius there is, it's not about the right moment or having the right story. It's just about being the first person to speak up and say something, because that kind of opens the floodgates for other people to be like, oh, this is something that I relate to too. It's a safe place to talk about this. And that's really kind of what we found.
Yeah, and it's also, I guess, making it easier to actually talk about, or giving people another kind of media to have that conversation, just to remove all that friction around opening a discussion.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And like some people aren't speaker, like Victoria and I had that, like Victoria's an artist and I'm a chatty person. She's a little more quiet and thoughtful. So having art as the medium kind of makes it safe for people to express themselves in a way that's sometimes less scary than saying, hey, I'm struggling with depression right now, or hey, I'm going through this right now. It's another medium for people.
Definitely, because it's important to have that outlet for like people like me or other kinds of creatives, like Laurel said, who have trouble speaking up. Like there has to be a different outlet, a different way for all kinds of people to express themselves. So that's really where the idea came from.
Fantastic. Dave, just to bring you in quickly, you've written a fair amount about mental health, but one thing that really stood out for me was that you've written that losing your mental health at a particular moment was in some ways the best thing to happen to you, and that people, all of us, myself included, when you hear mental health, you tend to put it in the kind of negative bucket as if it's a bad thing. But if we're truly going to destigmatize mental health, we really need to focus on the benefits and the positives that come from having these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've got to say that I was fortunate in that my mental health experience of having bipolarism in my 20s was transformative in a very positive way. So I went in as this very sort of meek, passive guy, and what happened with the bipolarism is it just showed me the potential. It made me feel that I could change the world, and coming out of it, I still felt, and I mean, 25 years later, I still feel that I can change the world. And I wouldn't have had my career if it wasn't for the mental health experience that I went through. And I think that I've got to say very clearly that I'm very fortunate in that. But from people I've spoken to through the years, because I've been very open about this in my career, people I've spoken to through the years, we've spoken about this and talked about what are the superpowers that this has given you. What is it that are the positives that this has given you? So I've spoken to people who've had anxiety, and there was a fantastic account handler that I worked with who said that his anxiety actually helped him draw attention to the bits that were the risky parts of a project. And if the screaming voices inside his head were still going on, it meant that there was something that had to be dealt with. It made him a fantastic account handler. There's a creative director I know who everything has to be just so. She's what do you call that? When everything has to be sort of very much in order. And it means that when she looks at a piece of design, she can tell like that. She gets a feeling if something is ever so slightly off. And I've spoken to so many people about this to find out what is it that is the benefit. And very often the benefit can just be as simple as having more empathy for others who are going through these situations. And that is a fantastic thing to have. But to me, I don't look at mental health as being something that is a problem or an issue, because, you know, we've got all the language round about it is negative. You know, it's a mental health issue, it's a mental health crisis, it's a mental health problem. And I don't look at it like that. I look at it as mental variance. And the human race would have got nowhere if it wasn't for mental variance. It's the people who are the outliers are the ones who've achieved things. It's the people who cluster in to try and be part of a norm, do nothing, you achieve nothing. You cannot change the world by being the same as everyone else. And to me, it's just a way of being able to embrace a difference. And that difference gives you some kind of advantage. And that's what I'm really interested in, is how can we understand the idea of mental variance rather than mental health problems? And how can we find the benefits and the positives in something that everyone gives you the, oh, sympathy eyes for, which is the worst thing. That is just the shittiest thing.
Yeah, completely. I think in many ways, we all need to let each other know that it's normal to not feel normal. But then even that doesn't sound right. It's or at least our idea of what normal is simply.
Giles, I think we need to be stronger. I think we need to say, fuck normal.
Yeah.
Quite seriously, normal is the lamest, shittiest place you can possibly be. If you are normal in your job, you are offering nothing that anyone else isn't offering. Fuck normal. We should be stigmatizing normal. And I do. I think if you're normal, fuck you.
It's beige.
Is particularly offended about this.
Well, funny enough, I say funny enough, you ignoring what a terrifyingly accurate prediction of sorts this was, you actually wrote a few years before this pandemic that we're living through that if 1 in 6 people had the flu, it would be all over the news. Now, with the unescapable and perhaps not appropriate reference point of coronavirus of 4.5 million cases in the UK, that figure, by the way, is 1 in 5 in the US people report experiencing common mental health problems like anxiety and depression. It would be all over the news, but it remains largely hidden. So Laurel and Victoria, that's exactly what we need to do more of. What do you think of what Dave's just said?
I mean, I totally agree with him, and Victoria and I have talked about this a lot. And I think one of the things that we've talked about with other people when we start talking about mental health is that mental health is something that's louder for creative people because we're neurodivergent, like because we're sensitive, because we see the world differently. That is our superpower, because we're more empathetic. Those are like the things about us that make us good creatives. And so if we're not caring for ourselves and we're not acknowledging the ways in which we need to create space for us to navigate the world in a slightly different way, we're actively getting in our own way of being able to be really good at our jobs. And so that's always been kind of our take on it. Vic, anything else?
No, yeah, I totally agree with Dave, especially, you know, fuck being normal. That really struck with me, but no, they really are superpowers. Like, if I feel like ADHD has really helped me become a better creative, because when I'm like concepting and like doing like art direction, I'm like all these different like ideas come into my head, which like in school, it was like I felt like a burden on me, but now it's like, oh, I can explore a different route, explore that route, and not just have like a single tunnel that I go down. So they really are superpowers, and it's just figuring out like how they benefit you, which is great.
Yeah, well said. The other point I wanted to bring up, actually, I think it's important at the moment, especially, that when we talk about mental health in the workplace, that we acknowledge that mental health at the workplace, mental health and home, they're really just one thing. They're just mental health, right? And there's no on-off switch with our mental health or even our physical health, either side of 9 till 5, say. But during the pandemic, work has invaded our homes. So actually, the lines there are even blurrier, and some would say ripe to potentially cause more distress and more anxiety. How do you think people should be coping with that, and how can businesses help their staff cope with that at the moment? Dave, sorry, can we go to you?
You know, I think there's a problem with business. And I can probably sum up the problem with business with a question I was asked a couple of years ago by a client, when they said, how can we come across as being more human? I was like, are you kidding me? You just be more human. What is the problem with you? Why do people leave their humanity at the door? And that's what it comes down to, is just be human. If you're human, you care about people. If you're human, you check in on people. If you're human, you've got some form of empathy. You can put yourself in their shoes and try and understand what they're going through. There was a study that I found out about this week, which was in the ad industry, is that less than 50% of people in the industry feel that their employer has properly supported them through the pandemic. And I think it's disgusting. It's shocking, but not, I guess it's not hugely shocking, because, you know, the industry has got a reputation for that. I think there's a lot of it is just giving a shit and just listening. And we need more of that from management. That management isn't about controlling the people underneath you. Management is about being underneath them, supporting them, helping them do their job, taking away all the crap that is stopping them from being excellent. And that means that they're excellent, and that means that you look good as a manager. We've just got the hierarchy in its head. So to me, that's what it's all about. We just need to actually change business, rather than necessarily try and focus overly on too many mental health steps that we need to do in the workplace.
Yeah, yes, agreed. Laurel, Victoria, anything you want to add there?
No, I mean, I agree with Dave, definitely. I think a lot of it is we need to also change clients' expectations as well, because, you know, a lot of companies say like, we care about our people and all this stuff. And when an employee like comes to their manager and says like, look, I can't do this, I have this going on, I'm working 80 hours a week, they're like, I hear you, but we still need this by end of day. Yeah. So it really can't change until we actually do change business and how we do function like as businesses.
Yeah. Isn't it funny, that phrase, I hear you, it's very different from I'm listening. I hear you, you can hear a pneumatic drill outside in the street. You're not listening to it, you hear it. Yeah. Listening is an active thing. And I think, Victoria, just using that term, I think you've hit the nail on the head for a lot of what I've discovered of like management style in the workplace.
Mm-hmm. And there's even, I mean, there shouldn't have to be in order to have these conversations, but there is, Laurel, there is a business case for it, isn't there? I mean, happy staff leads to happy customers via better performance, better employee retention, better profits, I would imagine. This should be easier to achieve, right?
I mean, I certainly think so. However, I think there's a lot of ways in which the creative industry especially is stuck. And, you know, I actually recently went full-time at EA. So game side, brand side, much different than, you know, in my experience as the agency. And I would just say that, you know, those protections, protecting your people, like that's built into the culture, that's built into the benefits, that's built in how you structure your day and what you offer people. And I'll say like a big bonus for me to going to EA, outside of like being really excited about the work, was that they were very mental health forward in terms of their benefits. And before I even knew what they were, or or how they might be something that I would want to personally take advantage of, it says something about the culture that you're joining. If they put that out there, you know that they've already invested in these benefits being there. Their managers are trained in how to deal with people that are struggling. These are like foundational things, and it says about what you care about. It is, they are invested in their people, and people stay there for a long time. So for me, I do think that some of it is really taking a look at, what do you value? Like, if you're saying like, we value these 5 things, this is our brand, how does that get expressed in what people experience when they work for you? Because it's all fine and good when it's this beautiful brand book that you're putting out there and however you're pitching clients. But if that's not what your employees are experiencing and your clients are experiencing from a value standpoint when they're working with you, it's just marketing and it's bullshit. So that's definitely something that I think a lot about, is making sure that what we're selling is actually reflected in the experience that people have when they're working with us.
Yeah, Laurel, I think that's brilliant. In the last year, one of the things that really struck me was when the Black Lives Matter movement made it very clear that there's a difference between being not racist and being anti-racist.
Yeah.
One is passive and one is active. And I think it is this kind of thing that we need in anything where there is some form of discrimination or inequality. We need to understand that being passive and saying that, oh, I don't have a problem with anyone who's got mental health issues, doesn't make you somebody who is a supporter of people who've got mental health problems. And as you're saying, there's a lot of talk. And I think especially in the advertising marketing industry, we're particularly bad at making it all about the talk and not enough about the action.
Yeah, that's literally what our project is about. Was trying to get people to, totally agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Can I ask you guys, we've only got a few minutes left. I'm slightly mindful of that, but can I ask each of you to give me a tip on managing your own mental health, whether that's based on a particular or specifics, or whether that's something you've just come to realize over time? Victoria, can we start with you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a constant thing that I do work on, and it requires, I guess, different strategies based on what I or someone like deals with on an everyday basis. But really, I think the important thing I've learned over the years is to not only set boundaries at work and with my friends and with my family, but with myself. I think was something that I didn't realize, and creating space for myself, and I don't know, not being afraid to get the help I need and not being ashamed of that either. Because I think once you already like have these like any kind of feelings of like depression or anxiety or whatever you're feeling, it really doesn't help to have this like extra weight on your shoulders of like shame for feeling how you're feeling. So really just being okay with it and accepting it has really helped me.
Yeah, fantastic. Laurel, can I come to you next?
Yeah, I think I've really learned this in the last year that, I mean, there's a lot of like tools that I'm using that help, but just in general, like being really clear about who I am authentically and being able, like creating the space, seeking out partners, seeking out creative opportunities that allow me to show up authentically as myself. Because for me, the depression, the anxiety, the sensitivity, the eating stuff, which I'm working on. I'm actually with a coach right now, and that's helping. That's just part of my program. That's running in the background constantly. But what I found is that like the dissonance and how hard I have to work to be in my own skin changes when I can lean into my authenticity, and when I know I'm with safe partners, and when I know people are welcoming of who I am as a person. So for me, that's just table stakes now. And if I can come at it, I want to say like that, bring your whole self to work thing. That's not exactly what I'm talking about, but like being really clear about what my values are, how I like to work, what is a priority for me day to day, and knowing that I have the freedom to lean into that has absolutely like transformed my wellness from the inside out. And I think And also it attracts the right people into your life. So I'll just say that from an energetic standpoint, you're not working against something that way. You're just able to like be in your own skin. And that's been super helpful and empowering in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Thank you, Laurel. Dave, would you like to can we
Yeah, certainly. But before I tell you that, I just want to say another thing on top of what Laurel's saying there is that an exercise I do with some of my clients for their staff is I get them to do, rather than a contract that you get from the company to the employee, I get the employees to do a contract to the company. This is how it's best to work with me. This is what motivates me most. This is how I like to be supported if I'm feeling stressed. And I get the employees to do contracts. And that's a really interesting thing, because they always say that you find out something about themselves. But to answer your question, Giles, I discovered that everyone's different. We all have our own ways of handling things, our own ways of coping. So just because somebody tells you to do something doesn't necessarily mean it's right. You have to find your own way. For me, I found my coping way, and I only discovered 5 years ago that I had been doing this. I mean, I've not had a mental health episode for 25 years, but I've worked out 5 years ago only what it was I was doing. And it's I keep myself offensively busy. I've always got loads of projects on, and it's kind of my way of having my mind constantly on stuff, because it keeps the black dog away. But sometimes I feel the black dog sniffing around. And I've realized now that what I do post-rationalizing my behavior is that those are the points that I start another big project, because it's a way of me stopping the attention going inside and me going in this internal dark spiral. And it takes my attention and puts it outside for me to care about something else. And I've never been medicated. And I'm not saying that no one should be medicated. I'm just saying that you need to find your way of coping. And I'm very fortunate to have understood my way of coping. And for everyone, it's not always medication.
That was absolutely fantastic. Dave, Victoria, Laurel, thank you so much. I do need to call time on the panel now, but we are all so grateful that you've yet again donated your precious time to this cause. So I would urge everyone to watch, listen, and love Laurel and Victoria's mental health and creativity, and Dave's lessons from a failed experiment isolated talks, which are easily found on the site, and Google them for even more. There's tons out there. My final cameo today is to introduce you and hand over to another generous and super talented member of the Isolated Talkers, Scott Morrison, aka Scott the Boom. Over to you, Scott.
Fantastic. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Can everyone hear me okay? No one can answer because we're all...
Yep, all good.
Yeah. Excellent. I'm going to share my screen. Listen, that was fascinating. Thank you, Laurel, Victoria, and Dave, and Giles for hosting that wonderful session before this. My name is Scott Morrison. I was very proud to be involved with the Isolated Talks. And what I want to talk to you about today is something that I find is really important, draws on some of the themes that you've heard from the people ahead of me. And I wanted to talk to you about, we're in this world going back into connecting and reconnecting with people, and everything that's happening, our world has changed, our lives has changed. It's been easier to lose those deep connections than ever before. And those connections that we have with people are the ones that keep us rooted, keep us mentally fit, fuel our visceral sense of belonging, and they make our lives better. Fundamentally, I use this session when I'm thinking about people connecting with their stakeholders and their bosses. But I've broadened it a little bit today to try and cover all kinds of relationships you're working through. But at the heart of all of this is just simply love. Now, I know it's a very simple word, a very simple concept. This is one of the things I love is mnemonics, if I can say it properly. Mnemonics. Love is the mnemonic that I want to share with you today. The way that we reconnect and the way that we connect and build fantastic relationships, particularly with people in our organizations and our network, is through love. And it's encapsulated in this quote. This quote for me is what really happens when you have really powerfully impactful relationships. They start with a love for yourself, which I heard some of the panel earlier talking about. It's also this idea of embracing a love for the other person or organization maybe in the relationship. And then fostering this thing that I call the value exchange that lives between. And when you can bring those three things together, it will really help you start to build your own value and show your value to a relationship. But you get value from a relationship and build and support and nurture fantastic, impactful relationships. So that's what I want to share with you today and explore. And the first part of that, of course, is about loving ourselves. And sometimes, and I speak from personal experience, this can be really, really difficult. It's one of the hardest things to do sometimes, but it's a fundamental building block in having the relationships that you want. And actually, going back to the love mnemonic, we start to think about how we do that. A simple way of remembering this is actually this idea of learning to overcome the volatile ego. Now, if you've read any brilliant books over lockdown, you've read anything by Ryan Holiday or Eckhart Tolle or Michael A. Singer, you'll recognize how an ego-driven personality can cause significant issues for all of us. Now, it's not to say that the ego is bad in and of itself. The ego is there and designed to actually help us. It's there to protect us. It comes from a good place, but how it goes about it isn't always the right way. And even though it does have our best interest at heart, it quite often complicates the situation and causes us angst. And part of the reason for that is because the ego can only see things in one context. It doesn't understand the reality in which we work. And so when it sees something that causes some kind of reaction, it either goes defensive, it goes aggressive, it goes into attack, or it goes into a kind of I forget the words, but you know, when everything's a resistance was the word I was looking for, a resistance to what's going on. And if you can learn to overcome that, it starts to help you love yourself more. And when you start to love yourself more, you do the first building block in that quote that I gave you at the very start. So the question that I want you to think about and ask when you are going through moments, when you are trying to reconnect with people, trying to rebuild a network, trying to relate to your boss, or just articulate and think about your value, and your ego steps in with that resistance to hold you back. Ask yourself the question, how real is this? What I mean by that is the ego operates like a 4-year-old child watching Jurassic Park. If a 4-year-old child was watching Jurassic Park, they'd see the dinosaurs and probably hide behind the sofa and think they were terrifyingly real. As an adult, we actually look at it and go, wow, those graphics are incredible. But we know it's not real. We have the capacity to be able to distinguish between what reality is and what non-reality is. And of course, the ego doesn't. So the ego is the 4-year-old child watching Jurassic Park. And so when you have those moments of resistance where your ego is telling you you're not valuable, or you've got imposter syndrome, or something's not, you can't do this, take a step back and ask yourself, how real is the input? Can I just take these glasses off for a second and think about how real this is? For example, people often say, my boss doesn't like me. I go, how do you know your boss doesn't like you? Has she ever said to you she doesn't like you? No. Has she ever disparaged you in front of everybody? No. Has she done anything that would signify exactly that she doesn't like you? No. Then how real is this? And it boils down to some signals that you're picking up, or your ego is picking up, that is causing a defense mechanism. And there's an easy way to get around it by asking the question, how real is this? Step into the reality, ask yourself the question, get the right evidence to support or not support or disprove what you're thinking, but really be kind to yourself. And that's the building block to starting to love yourself, asking that first question. And the second thing, of course, is then how do we show love for the other person? And Dave touched on this in the panel earlier, this idea of empathy. Now, when you're reconnecting with people and you're rebuilding networks, or you're trying to build that relationship with senior stakeholders or your boss, or whatever you're trying to build this value, it's better done from your angle of showing love to the person by showing loads of vulnerability and empathy. And of course, that's really hard. It's really hard as well if you don't do the first step, because the ego does not want to be vulnerable, neither does it want to empathize. And that's why doing that first step is important, showing the love for yourself. And showing the love for the other person means that you can engage and connect at a deeper level. And it's all actually about connecting viscerally. And that's where the heart of great relationships are, we quite often connect at this horrible surface level, and we bounce ideas and bounce things off of people, and we use what's called phatic communion. Phatic communion is when you say to someone, how are you? And you're not really that interested. You never really get to that deep connection. You never really show empathy or vulnerability. In my isolated talk, I talk about a wonderful moment I felt with Nelson Mandela, who showed some incredible vulnerability to a huge audience, of which I was very honored to be part of. And that vulnerability opened up a completely new relationship. It connected so viscerally with the audience that it still makes me, I still have a shiver down my spine when I talk about it today, but you can have a look at that on Isolated Talks. So connecting viscerally, of course, there's loads of ways you can do that, but I want to talk about in the context of reconnecting and building these great relationships and creating the value that you want to see. And quite often in our world, we are so ensconced with our own pain and what's going on for us that we really do forget that for other people, for people in our connected network, again, people who are stakeholders, people who are bosses, people who are trying to build really impactful relationships with, also go through a whole lot of pain. And actually, the higher you are in a business, or the harder and more responsibility you have, actually, the more pain you have, because quite often you are responsible for lots of other people's pain. And the big thing is that nobody really ever asks you what's going on for you. What's keeping you awake at night? What's the pain that you're feeling that I might be able to help alleviate? And that's the power of your value and your power of building these relationships, is being really empathetic to other people. We talked earlier about listening hard, actively listening to what is being shared with you, asking questions, going a little bit deeper to really empathize and feel someone else's pain will help you absolutely connect at a different level and connect viscerally. And the more vulnerability you show in how you go about that means that that person is going to connect with you even more. And so you've got these two wonderful bits of value coming together. You've got your love for yourself and what you're about and your needs to connect. And then you've got love for the other person and a willingness from them to connect viscerally with you. There's a great two big pillars of value there. And the beauty of how you make those things work is about the third love, which is for the relationship and creating the impact that you collectively want to see. And that is simply leverage our value exchange. All great relationships, all great connections, in some way, leverage a value exchange. I love what Dave was talking about earlier in the session about, thinking about your mental diversity actually as a real strength. It's a real superpower. And it's those kind of things that are how you can leverage that in the right way to create new value exchanges that really help emphasize your value back to a business, back to a relationship, and back to your own life. So you have a love again for yourself. And this symbiotic relationship is really simply thought about with this concept I talk about, light and shadow. Now, if you imagine that you've really connected deeply and viscerally with somebody else, and you've been able to say to them, I really understand what's going on for you, empathize, I can see what's keeping you awake at night. Let's call that shadow. It's pain and it can feel quite dark for that person. And if you think about your value as a person working for that person in a team, or a family member, or just a good friend, or a good connection, you can bring light into that shadow by helping select the things that are keeping them awake at night, looking at that as a shadow, and then bringing your light, your skills, your superpower, your brilliance to help them solve for those puzzles. And the more you're able to do that, the more you can leverage this brilliant value exchange. And the value exchange, especially in business and with your network, is the more that you all collectively have these conversations, the more you can all share what's going on for you and your pain and create and share the shadow, the more that other people in the organization, in your network and your connections across the business will be able to bring their light. And then when you have this wonderful symbiotic relationship across the organization of light being cast on shadow, you get this incredible output, this impact of strengths outweighing areas of weakness in an organization. And I use weakness in a pejorative term because I hate the word, but I simply mean areas where you're not as strong, or as the organization isn't as strong, or where there are real pain points that we can't solve right now. By expanding out with these conversations and creating these value exchanges, you're able to really flex your connections, your visceral creativity, and your ability to bring value to each other. Now, of course, it's like the financial world. If you read any books about money, the best kind of money is designed to be moving around a system at all times. For me, value is designed to be moving around a system at all times. And the best way to make that happen is simply to think back to those 3 pillars that we talked about. This idea of creating value through love. The most impactful relationships you can have with your network connections as a group, as an agency, as a business, are ones that start with a love for yourself. They embrace a love for the other, and you foster and leverage that value exchange that lives between. And now is the best time that you can really revisit your value, your relationships, your connections, rebuild them, reframe them, interrogate them, and get them to work even more powerfully. Create those real impactful bonds that enable you to reconnect across your life, across the organization, and just across as a human person, human being. That's what I wanted to share with you today. Thank you all for listening. If you want to contact me and get in touch and learn more about what I do, this is what I'm absolutely passionate about. You can go to my website, or you can connect with me on Insta or LinkedIn. And I'm happy to stay and answer any questions that people may have. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Scott. And thanks to everyone that's taken part in today's session, all of our speakers and our panelists. What an informative hour it's been, and what an inspirational one as well. I mean, it's fantastic to hear so many, personal stories, tips, and things that can inspire us to better understand perhaps our own mental health. So thanks to you all for taking part. Now we've got a few minutes now for questions. Some of our speakers are able to stay on and offer us a few minutes more. So if you've got a question for any of our speakers, pop it in the Q&A now, and we will endeavour to put it to them. Don't be shy. I'm sure no one will bite here. So go for it, please, Clear Channelers. But we've got a couple of questions lined up that we wanted to ask, and I think Scott there just talked a little bit about some of the stuff that Dave was talking about, and we love this quote, "Fuck being normal." That for me really resonated earlier on, and I really like what you said about sort of embracing your mental variance and harnessing that publicly. And I love the idea of your mental health being a superpower. Have you got any kind of tips for how people might be able to sort of share that variance in a work context or in a social context?
Sure. I mean, I'm not sort of thinking about it as you start saying to people, "Hey, I've got anxiety. Look at me. I can do this." I don't think it's about that. I actually think it's not about being public with trying to make a declaration. It's about, first of all, working out what it is to you that gives you an advantage. How is it that makes you different from others? What is it about that makes you special in some way? And only once you understand that yourself, do you understand the areas that you can potentially use that to add the most value. And to me, it's very much about that sort of private, introspective, getting to know yourself bit first. Then once you've done that, I would say just start concentrating your efforts in those areas rather than trying to make a public declaration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes total sense. So another kind of question we were thinking about earlier on, I mean, we talked at the start, Alice took us through some tips for kind of self-care. And I think somebody touched on them. Just remind us again of, what are those kind of personal self-care tips that people can can look to employ if they think they're perhaps struggling in this area. Is there anything perhaps, Scott, you'd like to share in that area? Obviously, you weren't involved with the panel earlier on, so anything you'd like to share with regard to self-care tips?
Yeah, I mean, I shared a little bit in the talk, which the power of it. I mean, if you read Eckhart Tolle's book, which is Power of Now, some people might listen to it. I actually listen to it rather than read it. It's such a beautiful listen. But you sort of realize that a lot of anxiety, and I've had it for a long time, it comes from the ego and a really displaced view of the world that you have control over, and more control over than you imagine, but actually we quite often don't believe we have a lot of control over it. And so getting yourself centered, asking some questions, not allowing the mind to overcome, your reality, and practicing that. And I'm not saying by any stretch, by the way, I'm any expert in this. It's just, these are things that I use myself, and this kind of thing about time, where, we think about the past and the future, and then actually the reality is there is only what's happening in front of us. And we spend a disproportionate amount of time worrying about the past and thinking about the future. And the reality is, at some stage, when things get too much, just anchor yourself in what is happening now and what is going on around you, because you realize in the now there really aren't any problems. There are very few. You're not buzzing with all this noise about what might be and what could be and what was and everything else. And the stillness sometimes can help you recenter, refocus, and move forward. So I definitely encourage people to investigate more. Just read more books about the ego and mental wellness, and educate yourself at the things you can do, because there's a lot that you can do.
That's good to hear. So probably following on from that, one of the things that we touched upon was sort of mental health in the workplace, and people often make that kind of connection, I think, between how busy you are at work, are you stressed, the impact that might have on your mental well-being. And I think during the panel session we touched a little bit, particularly with Victoria and Laurel, with regard to some of the challenges of working in a busy workplace. I mean, what do you think employers can do to support staff more in that area? And have you experienced any kind of really good examples of businesses that you think are operating well in that space? Maybe I could put that to you, Victoria or Laurel.
For sure.
We both have stuff. But
do you want to go first?
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think something that is small but very helpful is, because obviously your employers aren't going to hold your hand and every single day be like, how are you feeling? How are you today? Like, that's just not going to happen. Is really for them to say, put it out there and be like, hey, if you're ever feeling XYZ, if you ever need a day to do this, like, just let me know anytime. And really from the start, just putting it out there. So then you're not constantly wondering, are they going to be mad at me? Or is it bad that I'm not going to be here this day? I think really just opening that line of communication is helpful for all parties.
Yeah, so sort of honesty, best policy.
Yeah, I think on top of that, Victoria, I think depending on the mental health experience you're having, also we'll find that sometimes the mental health experience that people are having means that they're actually less likely to come forward. So for example, to me, the difference between anxiety and depression and the way that people deal with it is anxiety. People are willing to talk about exactly what it is that's upsetting them. They will talk about it. Mm-hmm. Depression, one of the aspects of depression is that people don't want to bother others. They don't want to be a burden. This burden is a big part of depression, which means that these people are less likely to come forward. I think it's really important that employers make a statement to say that we support and we will give you the time you need and all the rest. I think that's great. I think we need to match that with regular check-ins. And there's a couple of ways I've seen that done. One is by putting it into the process, into the system, so that the manager has to speak to their employees like once every couple of weeks to do a check-in, just to see how you're doing. And it just needs to be a sort of quick look. How are you? How are you doing? Are things going okay? Another thing that I've seen that seems to have worked quite well is creating like a buddy system or little groups, so that employees are caring for each other and looking for changes in behavior. That's how we know something's happening now, is when behavior changes. So when you've got a small group or a buddy system, you can see if that person's behavior has changed. And that is when we start to be able to recognize things before maybe that person is recognizing it's a problem themselves. So I think we need to match the words with the actions, but both are really important.
Can I just add to that, Dave, is that one of the things that I've just been doing recently is back to this idea of how do you change behavior, but how do you modify an existing behavior to elicit the change that you want to see? So interestingly, one of my clients were doing this big future of work project. One of the things that we've done is we've at the top said, when you're asking your team how you want to work and everything else, instead of the question about physical and mental wellness being at the very bottom, it's one of the first questions. Is how are you prioritizing your wellness, your mental wellness and well-being and health, and how are you going to measure it? So we're all used to in an organization talking about KPIs and everything else, and that's how you get behavior classically. And actually, when you start to put measures again, and it's quite it's quite sort of statistic driven, but you start thinking, what are the measures that would show that we are looking out for our mental wellness and our health of our people? Then how do we get people to perform highly against those? Over time, of course, you don't have to have the KPIs because it then gets embedded in. But as an opportunity that we're all reframing how we work, putting that as priority number one, I think has been a brave move for the company that I'm working with.
That's lovely.
I have a couple just quick things. I think one, encouraging your managers or people in positions of power to talk about their own struggles is just one way to really demonstrate like openness and the idea that like you can struggle and it's not a reflection on you being unworthy or somehow a bad employee. Like, I know that's been transformative to me when senior people in the industry have shared some of their vulnerabilities. And another couple of things that have worked really well, one of the things that EA is doing that I think is amazing is at least once a month, they have a focus day, which basically is blocked from meetings, and you have the opportunity and you're like actually encouraged to get offline and go do things that you need to do for yourself. Like whether that's a mental health thing, go for a run, or you want to like focus on work that you need to focus on that takes like a time of actually sitting with your brain that meetings keep you from doing. I think that's like super easy. You can have them rotating so that like the company doesn't have to shut down. Maybe it's marketing on Thursday and then on Friday it's finance. So there's just, it's so that it's rotating constantly. I think knowing that you have a day like that coming up helps you prep. You're like, okay, well, it's been a crazy week, but I know that I'm going to be able to get out and get like a 2-hour walk in the sunshine, call my mom, maybe schedule that like extra check-in with my therapist. Like, that you can plan for that. And that helps at a regular cadence. A couple other things that I know have worked really well during the pandemic specifically. My husband works for an agency, and one of the things that they did was actually had a bill code for this is Isla Rose, by the way. They had an actual bill code for pandemic thing, like basically just taking care of yourself during the pandemic, whether it was doing things for your kids or running an errand. So you actually had somewhere to put your time if you needed to do that. So you knew that you could do that and it wasn't a big deal. And then also I think it gave the employer the ability to check in and see how many people needed more time and how they could better support their employees. And I think that was a really great thing too.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. So do we think, obviously today we've talked, everyone's been pretty honest, pretty frank with us about perhaps their own experiences, but obviously not everyone, finds it easy to open up about mental health. And we know there's still an awful lot of stigma out there around it. We touched at the start, so Alice touched on, the continued notable levels of male suicide and issues with men in particular being able to open up about their mental health. What more should we be doing as employers or colleagues of those people to help them open up? What's the solution?
I think that exactly what, we've said that senior people, so people who are awesome and successful, opening up about their own journey, I think is fantastic to show that. First of all, it starts the conversation. It says that this is okay, and it says that this isn't going to stand in the way of your success. One of the problems that we have when people talk about mental health is that it suddenly creates a power differential. When you tell someone else that you're undergoing a mental health issue, if you get the sympathy eyes, what it does is it pulls you down, and that person then has power over you. And it's this power differential that is one of the problems that we have, that if people talk about what they might consider to be a weakness, and certainly when I was going through what I went through in the early 90s, it was considered to be a weakness, and I couldn't tell anyone. I didn't even tell my family what I was going through. And that is something that I think we really need to address, and the way of doing that is by having awesome people showing that you can be awesome even if you have mental health experiences that you're going through.
Brilliant. Brilliant. That's excellent advice. Now we've got a couple of minutes left. I just want to know.
So Mark, sorry,
yes.
Could I just add to that? Sorry, I think there's an interesting reframing that's happened over the last few years, where we've not just talked about mental health issues, we talk about mental wellness. And there's a great quote. I work with a guy called Jeff McDonald quite closely on some on mental wellness projects. And he's shared this quote a lot of times. It's like, take time to look after your health, or you'll have to make time to look after your illness. And so when you apply that to a corporate, an organization, the organization can take some ownership of helping people take time to be mentally well. And the more that you help people be mentally well and educate people, the more that people can start to see when they're not, or feel when they're not, and have the conversation if they're not. Because obviously, it starts to get talked about more in the organization in a slightly different context. And if organizations don't allow for that to happen, then of course, you just think of all sorts of different reasons, but having people to take time out for illness. There was a great article that's probably everyone's seen, campaign or something yesterday, saying people are ill before they even realize it's their work that's causing it. All this stuff is there evidentially for everybody. So the opportunity to reframe it, say, let's talk about getting mentally fit. What does mental wellness look like in this organization? I think starts to help people have some different conversations and not be as stigmatized.
Absolutely. And I love that term, mental wellness. Absolutely the right way of looking at it. Well, I think we're done. We've had an hour and 15 minutes. It's been fabulous. All I can say is absolutely huge thank you to you all for taking part. And in particular, of course, the team at Isolated Talks and Giles, who's there somewhere in the background, for helping bring this session together for us today. It's been absolutely fabulous. And what we'll do, I think, for the team is share all of your details, because I'm sure they're going to want to follow you on social media. They're going to want to look you up. They're going to want to read more and find out about all the great stuff that you've done in this space. I know that they're also going to want to follow Isolated Talks and find out more about that whole offering. So huge thank you to you all, to Alice, to Giles, to Laurel, Dave, to Scott, to Victoria as well. It's been an absolute pleasure. As I say, we'll circulate a little bit more further reading for those that are interested. But aside from that, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today and for a great session. Enjoy the rest of your day.